Boldwood presents Woden's Storm, written by Donovan Cook and read by Sean Barrett. Chapter 1. Midsummer AD 450, Caer Wnac. Prince Vortimer pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders as he walked through the streets of Caer Wnac, the capital city of the Cornavii people. The morning chills seeped into his bones and made him shiver as a cockerel crowed from somewhere. Caer Wnac was still sleeping, although the prince knew it would not be for much longer. Already he could see the first rays of the sun over the old stone walls that surrounded his father's city. A city that would one day be his, as well as the lands his father controlled, but only if he could stop the Jutes from taking that land. A growl escaped from his throat at the thought, and the calm he usually felt on these walks fled like a hare from a fox. "Is everything all right, Prince Vortimer?" Cadog, one of the men following him, asked, which only soured his mood even more. There were 4 men with him, 2 large warriors who had swords around their waists and wore the metal-plated vests the Romans had left behind. Vortimer did not need them. No one in Caer Wnac would dare touch him. He was the son of the High King of Britannia, and, as far as Vortimer was concerned, he was the second most powerful man on the island. Prince Vortimer was 32 years old and had proven himself in skirmishes against the Picts, who raided their lands from the north. He was a skilled warrior and had been trained by his father's best men. But he had his guard follow him on these walks because it made him look important. It made him feel powerful. Between Vortimer and the 2 warriors were Cadog and Grifud, whom he had known since he was a boy. There was no one in Caer Wnac he trusted more. They always joined Vortimer on his morning walks before the town woke up, and they would talk about his plans for the kingdom of the Cornavii, the tribe that controlled much of the lands in the West Midlands of Britannia. "I'm fine," Vortimer said, and glanced at one house as the door opened and a woman poked her head out. The baker's wife, Vortimer recognized her before she quickly disappeared. A beauty in her youth, but age had taken that away from her, as well as her husband's beatings, meted out to her because it was well known that she wasn't faithful to her husband. And Vortimer knew that all too well because he had spent many nights with her when he was younger, before her beauty had left her. Caer Wnac had once been a Roman fort, but the prince could not remember the name the Romans had given it. Not that he cared, though, because that was in the past, and his thoughts were only on the future, on a time when he would wear the crown his father wore now. His grandfather had built another wall around the old stone fortifications, a wall made of earth and wood, as they did not know how to cut stone like the Romans. But the earth mount wall, with its wooden palisade and old Roman fort inside, made Caer Wnac one of the strongest fortified cities in Britannia. Only the wealthy lived behind the stone walls, though. The merchants who had become rich selling furs and gemstones, the blacksmith who made weapons of exceptional quality, as well as the many cousins and half-brothers Vortimer had. Like the walls of the Roman fort, the houses and great hall were all made of stone, as well as the many other buildings the Romans had left behind. The old bathhouses where Vortimer and many of the wealthy residents would spend their days drinking wine and discussing important business. The smithy and the baker's house, as well as the merchant's part where traders sold goods from all over Britannia, and even the continent. But some of the stone walls had collapsed over time, or the tiled roofs had given under the relentless pressure of the rain, and these were replaced by wood, while thatched roofs covered houses that were once covered by the red tiles the Romans had made, just like his father's great hall. Vortimer's eyes ran over the houses, laid out in squares with perfectly straight lines between them. When he became king, he would send men to the lands the Romans still held. He would bring back the knowledge the Romans had taken with them, and he would make Caer Wnac the envy of all the kings on this island. he would make the Cornavii the most powerful tribe in Britannia. A smile crept into his neatly trimmed beard as the next thought came to him. And then he would be the next High King, the King of Kings. Vortimer then remembered the Jutes, and the smile fell from his lips. They had arrived the summer before in 3 ships, led by 2 brothers, and had offered their services to Vortimer's father. And all they had asked for in return was to be provided with food and clothing. Prince Vortimer had hoped that his father would send them away, but instead he had agreed to let them stay in Britannia as long as they protected the island from the Picts, who mercilessly raided the lands of the Britons from the north. The 2 brothers, Hengist and Horsa, had kept their word to his father. They had beaten back the Picts so many times that the savages from the north rarely raided the lands of the Cornavii or the lands of the other tribes. Although they were based on Rum Island, a small island in the lands of the Cantiaci people, and many days' ride away, they regularly sent patrols to the lands of King Vortigern and killed any Pictish raiding party that came across. Their ships patrolled the coast and travelled up rivers as they hunted pirates from across the seas, or any Picts who attempted to reach their lands by boats. Vortimer should have been glad about that. They brought peace to the lands that would one day be his. Trade flourished in Caer Wynach, and the people felt safe again. But the Jutes were heathens, and Vortimer knew they couldn't be trusted, and it angered the prince that his father turned a blind eye to them, not worshipping the one true God. Not even the priests could convince his father to encourage the Jutes to abandon their pretend gods and follow Christ. Vortimer clenched his jaw at the thought. He knew who to blame for the fact his father was cozying up to the men from the continent. That half-breed bitch, Bridget. She was always around, listening to conversations that had nothing to do with her, and whispering things in his father's ears. Not even Vortimer's mother held as much sway over his father. The woman was a believer of the old gods, the ones who ruled these lands before the Romans came. That was how she had bewitched his father, and, worse, spurned his own advances. Prince Vortimer swore that when he became king, he would burn her. "There's a storm coming," an old voice said, which broke Vortimer from his thoughts. He looked at the clear blue sky as the sun sat just above the walls of Caer Wynach, and saw no sign of any storm. The town had woken up while he was deep in his thoughts, and Vortimer frowned as he wondered how long he had been walking around like that. He glanced behind him and saw the 4 men staring at him, their eyes filled with boredom. "Aye, there's a storm coming," the old voice said again. Prince Vortimer turned to the old man, sitting with his legs crossed and his lined face covered in dirt, as around him women carried buckets full of shit and piss to the river to empty them out, while men greeted each other. He scowled as he wondered how the beggar had got into the Roman fort. The men guarding the gates should have chased him away. "Your eyes deceive you, old man. The sky is clear, and already the sun warms my skin. There is no storm." The old beggar smiled, even as Vortimer signaled to one of his warriors to chase him away. But before the warrior could touch the old man, he said, "The sky is always clear before the storm strikes. That's how she tricks you. So you lower your guard. Then she strikes while you are unprepared, and everything you hold dear gets washed away." Vortimer raised his hand to stop the warrior as the old man's words stirred something inside him. "The old man has lost his wits," Cadok said. But even as the brothers nodded, Vortimer sensed there was more to the old man's words, and a shiver ran down his spine before he could stop it. He knelt down and had to breathe through his mouth not to gag at the beggar's stench. "What storm are you talking about, old man?" The old man smiled, revealing his blackened gums and less than a handful of rotten teeth. But even in his cloudy eyes, Vortimer sensed a hidden power that made him nervous. A great storm from across the seas, one like we haven't seen for many generations. Vortimer raised an eyebrow and wondered if the old man was talking about the weather or the Jutes. And can this storm be stopped? He sensed the warriors behind him scowl, but Vortimer ignored them. The old man's cloudy eyes drifted to the cloudless sky. The gods of these lands were once worshipped by all who stood below them. The sacrifices made in their names kept them strong, and they protected all the lands which the blue waters surround. From the mountains in the north to the white cliffs in the south, the marshes in the west to the stony beaches in the east. But then the first storm came, and the gods were forgotten and withered away. There were no more sacrifices to keep them strong. Blood was not spilled in their honor anymore, and soon they were replaced by one from lands far away. The old man's eyes went to the large golden cross Vortimer wore around his neck. Vortimer didn't know why, but he felt the urge to hide the cross behind his fine tunic. But there was one who was stronger than the rest. From the north, she called out to gods from another land, asking them for help. "What is the old bastard talking about?" Briefwood asked, and Vortimer raised his hand to silence the man, even as he wondered the same. But for a reason he did not understand, he felt compelled to listen to the old man's words. The old man carried on. "The gods from lands covered by mighty rivers and strong mountains ignored her, but one reached out a hand and offered a weapon feared by gods from all over. But she was not strong enough to use it, and soon he washed the gods that had once stood proud on the hills of these lands away. Only a few remain now, their names whispered in caves and dark rooms where his light cannot reach those who still worship the old gods." Vortimer glanced at the sun before he scowled at the old man. "In God's name, what are you talking about?" The old man stared at him for a few heartbeats. "Find the spear which once belonged to a mighty god from the east, and you will succeed where we had failed. Only with the spear of the one-eyed god can you stop the storm." Before Vortimer could respond to the old man's words, a child screamed behind them. They turned, their hands on their weapons, but all they saw were the confused faces of women carrying buckets filled with water back to their houses. Vortimer shook his head and turned back to the old man, only for his heart to skip a beat. "Where'd he go?" One of the warriors asked the same question that was raging through Vortimer's mind. His limbs trembling, Vortimer scanned the streets on either side of him, but there was no sign of the stinking old man. The man couldn't have just vanished, and he doubted the bastard could move that fast. Prince Vortimer turned to his two warriors. "Find him, now!" The warriors both nodded, and before they ran off, Vortimer said, "And tell no one about this." As the two warriors ran off to find the old man, Kardok asked, "You don't really believe the old bastard's witless ramblings, do you?" Vortimer ignored his friend as he marched towards the main gate of the Roman fort, eager to find out how the man had got into this part of Caer Unach. But as he made his way to the gate, a question kept pestering him. Where was the spear, and who was this one-eyed god? Chapter 2. Somewhere in the realms of the gods. Frigga, the mother god of the Saxon people, as well as those whose land surrounded theirs, crinkled her nose as she walked past the corpses of those slain by her son. The stench of death sent a shiver down her spine, and she wondered if that was what they would smell like when their time came. And she knew their time would come, just like it came for all those who bled and breathed. Even the mountains would one day be worn down to nothing. But new mountains would take their place and grow tall. What scared Frigga was that she wasn't sure if new gods would replace them. She had stared into the flames of Woden's hearth fire, like he often did, and like her husband, she saw nothing beyond the fires. He had come from lands far away, and he was breaking the cycle. The way it had always been was not the way it would be any more. A crunching noise brought her back to the present, and she saw Tunor, her son, standing over the corpse of a giant, its blood dripping from his hammer as he panted. Another dead giant to add to the many he had already killed, and the many he would still kill. Men thought her son, with his thick red hair and beard and his bulging arms, protected them from the giants. But the truth was that he just loved to fight and to kill. But Twi and Woden were already thought of as gods of war, so the people had given her son another role. A smile came to her lips at the idea that they were the powerful gods, the ones people feared. Yet it was men who gave them their roles. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Frigga smiled at her son, who towered over her and blocked what little light there was in this place. "Tunor, have you not killed enough for one day?" Tunor shrugged as he looked around. "None of them breathe any more, so perhaps I have." He looked at her again. "What do you want, Mother?" Frigga raised an eyebrow at her son as she smiled at him again. "Why do you think I want something?" "You only seek me out when you need my help." He looked at his hammer, his weapon of choice, because he liked the sound it made when he broke skulls with it. It was perhaps the only weapon more dangerous than Woden's spear, Gungnir, but Frigga knew that Tunor's hammer would never start a war. It only ended them. "I need you to protect him, to keep him alive." Frigga glanced at the blood pooling near her dress and hoped it would not soak into the fabric. "Protect who?" "You know who. The one who found Woden's spear." Tunor grunted. "I heard Father's spear was found. I also heard you hid it from him." "I did not hide it from him. I lent it to another, and we both kept it out of your father's reach." Tunor glared at her, but Frigga knew she did not need to fear her son. "Why did you hide Gungnir from Father?" Frigga looked at the corpses of the giants Tunor had slain, and remembered the dreams she had had long ago. "Because I wanted to avoid a war that we did not need to fight. Not when we have a more important battle ahead of us." Tunor grunted. "You cannot avoid war, Mother, no matter what you do." A small smile came to Frigga. "You sound like your father." "Father is wise, as he is dangerous. Be careful not to follow Woden blindly, my son. He will sacrifice you if it serves his needs." Tunor hawked and spat as if her words meant nothing to him. "And now a man runs around with one of the most powerful weapons in all the worlds." Frigga nodded. "He has a purpose, a role to play in what is to come. But there are others who seek the spear, and he is not strong enough to stop them from taking it." "And you want me to keep him alive and the spear out of their hands?" Frigga nodded again. Tunor was not as dumb as many liked to believe, as he wanted them to believe. "I want you to watch him, and, when he needs your aid, you give it." "Why?" "Because Taranis, a god of the Britons, seeks the spear, and if he gets Gungnir, then he will start a war against us." "And you don't want to give the spear back to Father because he'll start a war against them?" Tudor wiped the blood off his hammer. "Father wants a war against them, and he always gets what he wants. Your father's lust for battle blinds him to our true enemy. The one from the east, from the lands of sand and dust?" Frigga looked at the dead giants, and again wondered if that was how they would go. "We should unite with the gods from Britannia to fight him, not start a war with them." "The gods of the Roman people united against him, and they still weren't strong enough." Frigga shook her head, and Gunnar sighed. "I will protect this man, mother. But if this Tyrannus tries to take the spear, then I rip his head from his shoulders." "Thank you, Gunnar." She was about to walk away when Gunnar asked, "Why do you fear him so much, the one from the east? Even father refuses to speak his name." Frigga looked at the death around her. "For as long as life has existed, there has been a cycle. Gods come, they grow old, they perish. And then new gods come. They also grow old, and they also perish. We replace those who came before us, and they those before them. Like the seasons come and go, so do we, gods. But he wants to break that cycle. His greed is greater than Woden's, and he wants it all for himself." "No one lasts forever, mother. We all know that. His time will come." Frigga nodded. "It will. But the real question is, what will he leave behind when he perishes?" Chapter 3. A few weeks later, near the island of Rum. Octa took a deep breath and savoured the salty air as he surveyed the surrounding lands. Rolling hills filled the landscape with patches of forests dotted between them. Thin trails of smoke from farmsteads and settlements drifted towards the clouds as birds circled the skies above him, their songs and cries washing over him and bringing a small smile to his face. Warda, his light-coloured mare, shook her head as flies buzzed around her ears, and Octa patted her flank as he spotted a small herd of deer disappear amongst the trees of a patch of forest. "Almost reminds you of home," Odalrig said, as he also studied the British lands. Octa glanced at the Saxon warrior, almost twice his age, who had once fought for his father. But despite the few grey hairs in his thick beard, Odalrig still looked the mighty warrior he had always been. His broad shoulders carried the weight of his chainmail vest with ease, while the many scars on his thick arms told the tales of many battles. Unlike Octa, whose chainmail vest sat heavy on his shoulders, and he often readjusted it to make it more comfortable. Like most Saxons, Octa was tall and broad-shouldered, but at 19 winters he lacked the width and strength of Odalrig. "This is home now?" Octa pushed the thoughts of the Saxon lands out of his mind. Octa had been the son of a mighty warlord, but he had fled from a battle, and his cousin, Uhtrik, had died because of it. Uhthrik's father, Witta, was his father's cousin, and the mightiest warlord in the Saxon lands, and he had killed Octa's father because of it. But Octa didn't know about that until his mother and Odalrig had arrived in Britannia. After the battle, Octa had travelled north to the lands of the Jutes. That was where he had met an old man he now knew was Woden, the war god of the Saxon people, who had told him of his missing spear, Bumpnir. Octa tightened his grip on the spear and remembered how he had joined the army of Hengist and Horsa, the two Jutish brothers who had come to Britannia to aid the Britons against their enemies. He had found the spear in the north of Britannia, in a cave near a great wall built by the Romans, but had been warned by Frigga not to return the spear to Woden. Not that Octa had planned to do that. He had wanted to give the spear to his father and redeem himself. He had sworn that he would one day return to the Saxon lands and avenge his father, but first he needed an army. Although he knew the longer he waited, the more the chance slipped away from him. The Thuringians, a tribe to the southeast of his homelands, were being forced into Saxon lands by the Huns, a vicious people who lived on horseback and did not know the taste of defeat. Many Saxons were forced from their homes as the Thuringians took land for themselves and killed any who tried to stop them. The Saxon people did not have a king. They had warlords who ruled their lands and families. But when there was an outside threat, they would unite and select one warlord to lead their combined armies. That warlord had been Witta, but as spring had changed into summer, news from the continent had reached them that Witta was struggling to keep the Thuringians back. Some of the other Saxon warlords had turned against him after he had killed Octa's father, but still Octa could not avenge his father. He glanced at Gungnir, the spear of Woden, in his hand. The spear was plain-looking, with a simple wooden shaft and an iron head, and at first glance it looked just like any other spear. If it hadn't been for the spear's name carved on the shaft in runes, and the two ravens engraved onto the spearhead, one on either side, and looking different from each other, then no one would have known that this was the lost spear of the war god. But even with Woden's spear in his possession, he still could not return to his homelands. And not just because he had no army. In Britannia, Octa was safe from Woden. Frigga had told him that. But if he went to the Saxon lands, then Octa was certain he'd have to face Woden's wrath for keeping the spear for himself. Frigga had warned him that Woden would be furious about that, and that there would be a price to pay. And Octa often wondered if Woden had played a part in his father's death. "Dunor knows it wouldn't be too bad if it didn't rain so much." Odoric scowled at the dark clouds in the distance as he scratched his beard. Octa chased the dark thoughts from his mind and nodded. "Aye, it does rain a lot, but that is why the lands are fertile, and food is plenty here. And that is why the brothers want it for themselves." Octa thought of Hengist and Horsa. They were warlords from Jutland, and had brought their army to Britannia to fight for the High King of the Britons against the Picts, a people from the north who raided these lands. The large island of Britannia had many small kingdoms who were too busy fighting each other instead of uniting against their enemies. That was why they were defenseless against the Picts, and why they needed the Jutes to protect them. But Octa felt there was more to Hengist and Horsa's offer of friendship to the Britons. They wanted these lands for themselves. Octa was certain of it, although now he was in the same position as them. He needed land for the Saxons, who were forced from their lands by the Thuringians. Octa often wondered if his cowardice that day had contributed. Perhaps if he had stood his ground, then they might have defeated the Thuringians. But the past was not important. All that mattered was now, Octa thought, as he glanced at Gungnir again, certain that the gods wanted something from him as well. Odoric saw him look at the spear. "Still can't believe you were foolish enough to travel to Britannia, or because an old man told you an unreasonable story about Woden losing his spear." Octa smiled. It was not the first time they had had this conversation, and he was sure he would have it many more times. "The old man was Woden. I'm certain of it now. He wanted me to find his spear." "Aye, but you did not know that then, did you?" Octa shook his head. "No, I didn't. But I had no other option. I had disgraced our people and my parents. I thought that finding the spear would redeem me, that it would help Father become more powerful than Witta." Odoric sighed, his eyes back on the dark clouds in the distance, and Octa understood why. The old warrior was there when Witta had attacked his father's village, but Octa's father had ordered Odoric to protect his wives and daughters, and Octa's mother had ordered him to take her to Britannia so she could find Octa. Odoric lived with the guilt of not defending his lord and friend, just as Octa lived with the guilt of what he had done. Octa knew the older warrior also wanted to avenge his father, but there were other things that needed to be done first. "And you still don't know why Woden wanted you to find the spear?" Octa shook his head again. "He wanted me to give it back to him." Odoric grunted, as he usually did at this point in the conversation. "But yet he is just letting you keep it. Gungnir, the spear of Woden." Octa scowled, as he usually did at this point in the conversation. He had not told Odoric or his mother about his conversations with Frigga, and not only because he was worried that they would think he had lost his wits, but also because he still didn't understand why Frigga was protecting him. "The gods have their plans, and we really understand what they are." Octa repeated the words his mother would usually say at this point. Odoric turned back towards the small island off the coast of Britannia that Hengist and Horsa had taken for themselves. The island sat near the mouth of the large river which led to Caer and that was why the brothers had taken it for themselves. It had been half a season since Octa's return and his fight with Hedric, the Jute who had left Octa to die in the cave in the north because he believed he had found the spear of Woden. But the real spear had been hidden in a carving of a British god, and the spear Edric had brought south had been a decoy. Odoric wore the dead Jute's chainmail vest now. Octa's mother had told him that the older warrior had given his up so they could get a spot on a ship destined for Britannia, and so Octa had given Edric's armor to him. It was too large for Octa anyway, and he was comfortable with the old Roman-style mail vest he was wearing. The brothers had spent the spring and summer fortifying the island, although Octa wasn't sure it was against threats from the north, or the Cantiaci, the British tribe that controlled the lands in the southeast of Britannia, including the small island the Jutes now lived on. Both, he suspected, as Pictish raiding parties still sailed south to raid the rich lands around Caer, the capital city of the Cantiaci people, and the Cantiaci regularly attacked hunting parties sent out by the brothers. The Jutes had built a wooden wall around the town they had taken for themselves, as well as the camp where most of their army stayed. A wooden bridge spanned the tidal beach so that the island could always be reached, and was heavily guarded. The Cantiaci had not attacked the island yet, and Octa doubted they would, for the same reason the brothers hadn't retaliated yet either. They were trying to convince King Vortigern, the High King of the Britons, that the others were to blame for the unrest. "We can't stay on that island forever," Odoric said. "You are the son of a warlord. You need your own land." Octa sighed. "I was the son of a warlord. Now He hesitated. He still didn't understand what he was now. The fear that had been his constant companion had been replaced by something else. A calm he did not understand, and he often wondered if it was the spear that was doing that to him. But even though he no longer feared battle, Octa had no desire to rush towards it. Not like other warriors his age, who were still desperate to make a name for themselves. At 19 winters, Octa should be seeking out battles and earning his reputation, just like his father had done before him. But Octa did not want any of that. He had come to Britannia to redeem himself in the eyes of his father. But now his father was dead, and even though Octa carried the spear of Woden, he was unsure of his path. Only Weird, the god of fate, knew that. Even amongst Hengist and Horsa's men, Octa stood out. Hengist treated him like a friend, inviting him to their hearth fire and sharing ale with him. Horsa, on the other hand, treated Octa as if he was a threat. He scowled at Octa and barely spoke to him. And then there was the spear. Despite what Hengist had promised, Octa knew Horsa wanted Gungnir for himself. Octa glanced at the spear again, and wondered why Woden had chosen him to find it, and, more importantly, what Woden was planning for him. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, which Octa did his best to hide from Odoric. Woda whinnied underneath him, as if she sensed his unease, and he stroked her neck to calm her. You are still the son of a warlord, despite what happened, and you carry Gungnir. You should be leading an army and taking land for yourself, not running errands for the brothers." Odalric hawked and spat. "Octa the coward, isn't that what you said they called me back in the homeland?" Octa turned his attention towards the dark clouds, which were slowly approaching them, as if they were a bad omen from the gods. Perhaps they were. Who would follow a warrior who fled from battle? Odalric grunted and looked away from him. Octa understood why. Odalric had called him the same before. He knew it even if he had never heard it. The older man was a proud warrior who would rather die before fleeing from a battle. He didn't understand why Octa had decided otherwise. Octa himself didn't understand it either. But that was in the past, and he knew he needed to focus on the future. "I was wrong," Odalric said after a short while, which surprised Octa. "You are your father's son, as well as your mother's. And the others will see that too when they see you with Gungnir in your hand and an army at your back." This time Octa grunted. "First they need to come here, and my name won't bring them." "No, it won't," Odalric agreed before he too looked at the dark clouds again. "We should get going before those clouds catch us." "Aye. Although I think no matter how fast we ride, those bastard clouds will catch us either way." Octa turned Woden towards the Roman road before he tapped his heels into her flank. She responded instantly, unlike Odalric's horse, who had to be threatened before she moved. "Only the gods know how you could be lucky enough to find a good horse on this island. They're all as stubborn as the people." Octa smiled. "I didn't pick her. She picked me." Which was true, and he was grateful for that strange event, because she had been a good companion to him. "So why are we being sent to—" Odalric paused as he struggled with the words. "To Caer Unak. Because the brothers need King Vortigern to deliver more food. Their army has grown, and with the Cantiaci attacking the hunting parties, there isn't enough food." Odalric raised an eyebrow at Octa as they reached the Roman road and turned north. "And you think this King Vortigern will do it?" Octa shrugged as he glanced at the dark clouds they were riding towards. He felt a sense of trepidation that he could not explain, and tightened his grip on Gungnir. Chapter 4. Land of the Brigantians, near the great Roman wall. Bardolph ground his teeth as he sat by the fire in the clearing of a forest and tried to hide from the dampness of the north. Although it wasn't much different from Caer Unak. What made it worse was that every time it was wet or damp, his shoulder would ache, and that pain only fed his anger at having to sit here and do nothing. But Bardolph did not know what else to do as he glanced at the men around the small clearing, their clothes ragged and faces dirty, and the tents they slept in. Some were sitting by the fire with him, while a few men skinned a deer they had caught that morning. There were others as well, sitting in groups as they spoke of things he didn't care about. Bardolph closed his eyes and remembered that day when they had left Costopitum, the old Roman fort by the Roman wall, and made their way towards the sacred forest they had been told about, where they would find the shrine of Britannia, the same forest he was in now. He had guided a group of the Jutes north as they searched for a weapon they claimed to belong to one of their gods, although only one of the group really seemed to believe it. Octa, the Saxon coward. They had found the fort, which was used by Saxon feudality, men who had come with the Romans and were all old now, and been told where to find the shrine the spear was hidden in. The old healer in the fort, a Briton, had warned Bardolph not to go. He had told him they would all die if they went near the forest, but Bardolph's curiosity had got the better of him. Or perhaps it was that he wanted to be seen as equal to the men who came from the lands of his grandfather, a Saxon warrior who had come to Britannia to fight for the Romans. Bardolph barely remembered the man, only that he was tall, like a giant, and was strong enough to lift an ox. Or perhaps that was what his mother had told him. But as Bardolph outgrew the other boys of Ger Ornach, he believed he would be a mighty warrior like his grandfather had been. Bardolph snapped the twig in his hands, which made the others around him glance his way. "You should calm yourself, Bardolph," Bellicus said. He was older than the rest of the leader of this band of... Bardolph frowned. He didn't really know what they were. They weren't outlaws, but they lived like those who had been banished from their homes in camps hidden amongst the trees, where they spent most of their time hunting or foraging for food. They called themselves the protectors of Britannia, men who guarded the sacred forests and shrines of the old goddess. But all they did was sit around and tell stories of the old gods. That day, when the Jutes and Bardolph had left the fort to find the shrine, they were ambushed by these men, who rained arrows down on them from the safety of the trees. Bardolph had realized he did not want to die with the Jutes, and had kicked the flanks of his horse, but, as he raced away from the danger, something struck his shoulder. Bardolph still remembered the blinding pain that threw him off his horse. At first he thought he had been struck by lightning, but as he landed on the ground, he felt the spear in his back. He had almost laughed at the irony of dying from a spear when they were looking for one, but he had blacked out before he could. When Bardolph had woken, he found himself in this camp, and surrounded by angry men pointing dirty daggers and arrows at him. They had believed he was a Jute, and it had taken him much to convince him he wasn't. In the end, he hadn't, though. It was a druid, with his long grey beard and stern face, who had told them who he was. But Bardolph never got a chance to speak to the druid. Bardolph looked at Bellicus, his face dirty and clothes ripped. Bellicus leaned forward, and Bardolph saw the mark of the cult of Britannia inked on his chest. Everyone in the small band in the clearing wore the mark, and Bardolph knew there were many more of them in the lands of the Brigantians. But unlike these men, many other cult members lived in the towns and on farmsteads, where they still prayed to the old goddess and told stories of her past deeds. "How can I be calm? My shoulder hurts as if it was injured yesterday, and we sit here and do nothing." The man sighed as he poked the fire with a stick. "And what should we be doing, Bardolph?" Bardolph glanced around the fire, as the others all looked at him with vacant eyes. "We should be out there, trying to find the spear. We should warn the kings of the Jutes' plans." "We don't know the plans of these Jutes, and they are far to the south, so they are not our concern." Bardolph jumped to his feet and did his best to ignore the pain in his shoulder. "They have the spear you were supposed to protect." "You already sent one of us to his death by convincing him to find the spear," another said, and many grunted their agreement. Bardolph glanced away. He had convinced one man to sneak into Costopitum when he had found out that Octa was there. He did not know if Octa had the spear, or if the others had taken it south with them, but he wanted Octa to pay for what had happened. But that man had failed, and soon after his attempted attack on Octa, word had reached them that he had been killed by the old Saxons who guarded the Roman wall. "We should attack the Saxons in Costopitum," they told the Jutes where to find the spear, all to protect one of their own. "A coward who did not deserve to be protected." Bellicus shook his head. "Reynold and his Saxons are not our enemies. They are our friends, and they have protected us from the Picts for many winters." "But they told the Jutes where to find the spear." The leader shrugged. "It is not their responsibility to protect the shrine. And besides, we have brothers in the fort who send word to us when others seek it, so that we can stop them from finding the shrine." Bodolf shook his head, struggling to make sense of how these men were so calm when the Jutes had the spear of one of their most powerful gods. He still didn't understand how the spear had come to be here, or even if it was real. But no one here had the answers to those questions, and neither did they seem to care. All they cared about was preserving the memory of the Mother Goddess and protecting her shrines. "And you failed. The shrine was destroyed and the spear was stolen." Bellicose lowered his head and stared at the flames. "Aye, we failed that day, and we lost many friends to the men from the continent. But you have no right to remind us of that." He got to his feet and stared at Bodolf, who almost towered over him. "We let you stay because we were told to, but you don't wear the mark of Britannia." Bodolf clenched his fists as he glared at the men. He did not know why he was still in the forest with these men. He was free to leave, but every time he thought about returning south to the lands of the Cornevii and to his sister Bridget, something stopped him. Something Bodolf did not want to admit to himself. So he had stayed. But his anger at what had happened that day refused to allow him to accept his fate. "You are cowards! Every single one of you! How can you just sit here where your friends died to protect a spear that is now in the hands of our enemies?" "Because I told them to sit here," a stern old voice said, and they all gasped when they turned and saw the Druid standing on the edge of their camp, the same Druid Bodolf had seen that day. "And I told them to sit here and do nothing, because they have failed to protect the sacred spear. Others who are more capable have been sent to find the spear." "Vatius," Bellicus said, and lowered his head again as his cheeks burnt red. "What brings you here?" Bodolf saw how everyone lowered their heads, as if they feared the old man with his long grey robe and walking stick. He had heard of the Druids, most had, but Bodolf never believed in them. Neither did he believe they possessed any magic, not like in the stories his mother had told him. And he doubted this Druid had the same gifts as Bridget had. He wondered if she would have been a Druid if the Romans had not killed most of them. Instead of answering, the Druid glared at Bodolf and stepped to the side. Out of the shadows walked a woman who looked older than the trees in the sacred forest, her back bent over with age, and her long white hair trailing on the ground as she shuffled towards the flames, without acknowledging any of them. The men all stared at the woman, their eyes wide before they dropped to their knees. "The wise one," Bellicus said as he too dropped to his knees. Only Bodolf and the Druid were left standing, as the old woman finally made it to the fire. She stood there for many heartbeats and stared at the flames as if they spoke to her, and then, with a deep breath, she sat down and crossed her legs. Bodolf glanced at the Druid, who was still glaring at him, before he turned his attention to the old woman, her cloudy eyes still fixed on the fire. "There is much anger in you, Bodolf, son of Brechan." One man handed the old woman a cup of water, and she nodded her thanks to him before taking a sip. "Not like your sister. She was filled with fear when she came to me. The fear of the unknown. But you treat the unknown like an enemy. You want to destroy it before you try to understand it." Bodolf's eyes widened when he realized who the old woman was, and he shook his head. "It can't be. Bridget told me you were old when she was with you. How are you still alive?" The woman smiled a toothless smile at him. "And yet I remember her, as if she came to me yesterday. Not many like her come to me, not anymore, although I have not spoken to her for a long time. Much is happening. Much is changing." Bardolph frowned at the woman, not understanding what she meant. She told me about you, about how you helped her understand her gifts. The wise one nodded. She was the last one I trained. With the new god, those like her are punished now. They are beaten until they submit to the new god, instead of being taught to understand the way of nature, the way of the gods. Bardolph glanced at the druid again, but the man was busy talking to the others. His forehead creased when he realized no one was paying attention to him or the ancient woman. He looked at the woman again, whose eyes were still fixed on the fire, as if she saw something in the flames. The ways of the gods are done. People forget about them and turn to the Christian God. The woman nodded. Like you? You pretend you turn your back on the gods so that you can fit in with the others, despite your sister's gifts. Bardolph gaped at the old woman, but then he closed his mouth and clenched his fists. She did not know him. I did what I had to be accepted. It's not easy when everyone calls you a half-breed, when they treat you differently because of who your grandfather was. But I still heed my sister's words. You are right. One should not be punished for the deeds of those who came before. But we live in a world where many are too blind to understand that. The wise one carried on, staring at the fire. You say you heed your sister's words, yet you rode with the one she warned you to stay away from. I did what my king told me to do. The old woman smiled again. Your king told you to ride north with them? Bardolph turned his attention to the fire and watched as it consumed the wood that gave it life. In the flames he saw the Jutes and remembered the words they spoke to him. He remembered Octa and the fear in his eyes when they needed to fight. I wanted to learn more about them. I wanted to know if they can really be trusted. And I was curious. The wise one nodded. And what did you learn about the men from across the seas? Bardolph gritted his teeth. They are not the friends they claim to be. They want these lands for themselves, and they will destroy everything in their path, just like this fire if we let it. Many fear the fire. They fear the flames and treat it like an enemy, the wise one said to him, and Bardolph looked at her pale eyes. He frowned at the look on her face. An acceptance of things to come was the only way he could explain what he saw. But that only left him more confused. But the fire can be a source of good as well. The flames get rid of the old and faded so that the new one bright can grow. That has always been the way. The old die and the flames consume them, and in their place the young and vibrant come, and life continues. The wise one looked at Bardolph and gave him a sad smile. Remember, Bardolph, the flames take life, but in their wake there is always rebirth. Bardolph struggled to make sense of what the wise man was saying to him, and he wondered if Bridget had to deal with the same. But before he could find the words to respond to her, the druid cleared his throat, and Bardolph was surprised to see the man standing behind the wise man, as if he was protecting her. We must go. The old woman nodded, and the druid helped her to her feet. Vetius is right. I have been here too long. Wait, Bardolph said. What about the Saxons and the spear? The spear has a purpose, and so does the one who wields it, the druid said, and the wise one nodded again. And what is that purpose? Bardolph's heart was racing in his chest, but he could not understand why. Perhaps it was the urgency in the druid's movement, as if they were running from someone. Vetius is right. The wise one said. There are those who believe I have betrayed them when I did what had to be done to protect my home from him. From him? Who? Bodolf asked, but got no response as the druid and the old woman walked to the edge of the clearing. What is his purpose? The one with the spear? The wise one stopped at the edge of the clearing, and without turning back, she said, To bring fire to these lands. Chapter 5. You are leaving, then? Bellicus startled Bardolph as he packed a sack with provisions, enough for half the journey south to Caer Wynach. He would have preferred to take more with him, but these men did not have much, and they had been kind to him, so he did not want to take most of their food. I have to warn my sister. She needs to know what's coming. Bridget would know what to do. She spoke to the gods, and they would tell her how to stop the fire, how to stop the Jutes from conquering Britannia. Bardolph was sure of that, as he tied the sack closed with a bit of rope before he pulled his cloak over his shoulders. It was in the middle of the brief summer night, and he had hoped to sneak away unnoticed. Bellicus stared at Bardolph, who doubted the man really understood. His family had all died from raids by the Picts, raids the old Saxons by the Roman fort had not prevented from happening. Bardolph wondered why the Brigantians still relied on them, when they were too old to fight or to protect those near the Roman wall. But that was not an argument he wanted to have with these men. Not that they would care about that. They only cared about protecting Brigantia's legacy. Why do you need to warn her? You heard what the wise one said. The one who wields the spear will bring fire to these lands. He will destroy everything we love. She also said that life follows the flames, that there will be rebirth. Bardolph's irritation grew, and he turned to face the man. How can you just sit there and not care? Bellicus looked away for a few heartbeats as his eyes ran over the sleeping forms of the other men in the clearing, before he looked at Bardolph again. For as long as I can remember, this cult has protected the secrets of Brigantia. There are many of us all over Britannia, as well as cults to the other gods. In some places we are forced to hide in the shadows, otherwise the Christians punish us. Here in Brigantia we can be more open about who we are, but we still have to fight the encroaching hand of the Christian god. Bellicus sighed. You are right. We failed. We were supposed to protect the sacred spear, as we have done for many generations. I still remember the first time I was shown the spear by the man whose place I took. I can still see the gold-rimmed spearhead in my mind and the golden rings around the shaft. Bellicus fell silent for a moment. Every man here wishes we had succeeded. But the spear is gone, and now we are being punished for it by Vetius. Even if we wanted to bring the spear back, we don't have the men to do it. We don't know who has the spear. You were told that the young Saxon in the fort returned with a spear. Bardolph interrupted Bellicus, who nodded. He returned with a normal, plain spear, the same type we use, and you sent a man to his death because of it. Bellicus's face darkened for the first time in this conversation, before he sighed again. There is much you don't understand, and that I can't tell you. Vetius told us you would leave, and that we shouldn't stop you. Bardolph frowned at this, and before he could respond, Bellicus signaled to another man hiding in the shadows. Motius has a horse ready for you and a spear. It is also enough food for you to reach the lands of the Cornovii. Be careful, Bardolph. The road is dangerous. May Brigantia protect you. He turned and walked away before Bardolph could say anything. Bardolph shook his head and dropped the sack he had filled before he made his way to Motius, who, like Bellicus said, was standing at the edge of the clearing with a horse and spear. Just so you know, Mortius said, I agree with you. I think we should be out there trying to find the spear and bringing it back. Britannia is angry with us, but Bellicus is too old and too weak to see that. Bardolph raised an eyebrow at Mortius, who was still only 17 winters old. His father was one of the senior men in the cult, and so Mortius had been forced to join, even though Bardolph sensed that he did not always agree with the cult. Then come with me. Together we can find the spear and bring it back. Mortius shook his head. I have to stay. Bardolph nodded and took the reins of the horse. Good luck, Bardolph. I pray to Britannia that you succeed. Thank you, Bardolph said, before he led the horse away from the clearing and out of the forest. The moon seemed extra bright that night, as if it was trying to guide him, and in the darkness he heard an owl hooting, which made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Bardolph glanced over his shoulder and saw a white owl sitting on a branch of an old tree, its black eyes fixed on him. He tried to ignore the shiver that ran down his spine, but couldn't. When Bardolph finally left the forest, he sighed with relief before he mounted the horse and, with one last glance at the dark trees, he turned towards the Roman road. Bardolph knew he had no time to waste, and as soon as he reached the Roman road, he raced south, while the owl flew above his head as if it was following him. He had to warn Bridget. She had believed the Jutes could help her bring the old gods out of the shadows and back into the light, but he was certain that when the Jutes took control of Britannia, it would be their gods who ruled, not the old gods of these lands. He pushed his horse to go faster and prayed that he was not too late to stop the fire from spreading. Bridget sat in front of the old tree in the sacred grove of the forest near Caer Unach, her eyes closed as she waited for Britannia, the mother goddess, to speak to her. But all she heard were the leaves rustling in the wind and birds singing from the branches. Somewhere in the distance, a stag called out a challenge to another, and Bridget could not help but wonder if that was a sign of things to come. Bridget had been born with a mark on her chest near her shoulder, which looked like the head of a spear, and from a young age she had been sent dreams by the gods of Britannia, the ones her people had worshipped before the Romans had brought the Christian god to the island. But since the Jutes had arrived the previous summer, the gods had been silent, and Bridget couldn't understand why. Were they hiding from the newcomers? Or had they fled the island they had ruled over for many winters because of the gods the men from the continent had brought with them? Bridget didn't know. All she knew was that she had never felt so alone, so lost before. Before the previous summer, she had the gods, which gave her a purpose, and with that purpose, confidence. Bridget had always been certain of her role and of what the old gods wanted from her, and she had used that to become King Vortigern's lover so that she could manipulate him in order to help the old gods against the Christian god. King Vortigern claimed to be a Christian to please those who worshipped the god from the east, but Bridget knew he also believed in the old gods, which meant he listened to her words, but only while he believed the gods still spoke to her. She had also had her brother, Bardolph. He was the last of her family after their father had died in a border skirmish against the Corioltauvi, a tribe to the east who hated the Cornavii, and their mother was killed by a drunken Christian priest. Bardolph had been one of King Vortigern's warriors, and when the men arrived from the continent, King Vortigern had sent him to deal with them because he spoke their tongue. But now her brother was dead, and the gods had sealed their lips to her. Bridget had never felt so helpless before, but she was determined not to let others see it, especially not those who wanted her out of the way. Those like Prince Vortimer, King Vortigern's son, who once wanted her, but now hated her because she had caught his father's eye. Bridget's hand went to the bead necklace she wore around her neck. It had belonged to her mother, and was the only thing she had left of her. Bridget's grandfather had been a Saxon, who had come over with the Romans and had fought for them. But when the Roman Empire took her armies away, her grandfather, like many of his people, had stayed behind. He had told Bridget and her brother stories of his gods, although Bridget could not remember them well. But every time the two brothers, Hengist and Horsa, came to King Vortigern's hall, the air was filled with a sense of chaos that left her confused. Bridget opened her eyes and stared at the old tree as she tried to ignore the large raven.